45. Should I go ahead and get started for um, whoever's here? Um, y'all have to pardon me. I am a preacher, so I'm going to start with a word of prayer. Lord, give fertile soil to the message that will be shared today. May it offer a challenge and encouragement to all those who enter into this session. It's in Christ's name and for his sake I ask it. Amen. All right, y'all. My name is Adam Mixon. For those of you who didn't read the bio that before you entered into the class, I am a pastor of a Black Baptist church in Birmingham, Alabama. But I'm not from Birmingham. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I was educated at the University of Cincinnati, Samford University, and then Beeson Divinity School that's here in Birmingham. I've been serving the Zion Spring Baptist Church, a historic Black Baptist church in the city here, for going on 20 years, while at the same time working as an engineer in IT. So I guess probably probably 3 years ago, and doing some work with another organization out of Atlanta, Georgia, conversation arose about how to balance the demands of bi-vocational ministry. And I hadn't really thought about it because I had been doing it. I had never really stopped to think about how I was actually managing all the competing priorities and the responsibilities and managing to stay healthy and while serving a church, but also having to work a job. And it kind of became it came with certain realization that this is a conversation that needs to be had, because our landscape is changing, our context is drastically changing, and the old models, or those old sought after models of vocational ministry, where we go to Bible college, go to seminary, get called and serve a church, and that's all we do. For Black folks in particular, a lot of that was myth from the beginning, but even more so now, that is not a reality. Couple that with the fact that so many of our congregations sit in underserved communities that don't have economies to support full-time ministers. Couple that with the exorbitant cost of theological education, and what you end up with is if we follow this old model, you end up with a dearth of leadership in our churches, unless we learn how to do things differently. And that's kind of where this talk is centered down into. This is a different approach to doing ministry. It's entitled "Blessed Are the Tent Makers" because it's based upon the life and ministry of Paul. And it's based on this understanding that in the early church, it was not uncommon for those who were leaders, those who were establishing or serving those house churches in those days, that they had jobs and that they worked so that they could do the work of ministry, and they did whatever it took in order to sustain the life of that community. Paul himself, as you know, most of you already know, was a tent maker. And Paul actually does something remarkable in his tent making. He doesn't look at it as an unwelcome burden. He doesn't look at it as something that was a distraction or stood in opposition to his apostolic calling. But his tent making provided an opportunity for the gospel incarnation, gospel in demonstration, as well as in declaration and proclamation. So the first thing, as we kind of go into this talk, I want you to think about the opportunities, not so much the obstacles of bivocational ministry, but the opportunities that are associated with bivocational ministry, or some of y'all are multi-vocational. And if you're sitting listening right now, that's an opportunity for you to chime in. Can you think off the top of your head about some of the opportunities that you might encounter as a bivocational minister? Because one of the things I think that is important for us when we're struggling is learn how to use constructive language about the things that we're talking about. Again, most of us, if you're working in bivocational ministry, most of us may have started off thinking that, well, this is just where I'm starting. Because one day I'm going to get this grand call and I'm going to be able to quit my job and all I'm going to do is serve the Lord all day. Well, that opportunity might not come. Does that mean that you're under this oppressive burden, or is it that perhaps God has given you a different type of opportunity to serve the body? So real quick, and this is not in my slide presentation, it's just kind of off the top of the head. What are some opportunities that you perceive when it comes to bivocational ministry, if any at all? Y'all just type and let me know what your responses are. And I guess while you're thinking about that, I'll read to you the passage from Acts chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. This is the English Standard Version, where Luke writes, after this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome, and he went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked. He stayed with them and worked, for they were tent makers by trade, and he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and tried to persuade Jews and Greeks. So here, Paul, we see, direct evidence of Paul laboring. Amen. I see you, Mary Chris. Your paid jobs gives you the freedom to serve God's people who have no money to pay clergy. I'm glad you said that, because you're actually preempting where my mind tracks when I think about bivocational ministry. It's freedom. It's freedom. You can maintain kind of your prophetic voice. I see that too. When you're not dependent on salary. Some of us are scared to tell the truth because we're scared that we might lose our benefactors, those givers. It might make us a bridge to message that God has laid on our hearts. So certainly keeping a job, making tents keeps you free. It kind of eliminates the crisis of conscience that we find ourselves in sometimes when we have to tell truth to the people who we think are feeding. So, Angela Marks, I see the ministry you served didn't have a budget, so it helped you to do ministry and not beg, again, which to me is a type of freedom. You can do the work. It's creative, it's demanding, but rather than obstacle, it is an opportunity, which is kind of where my slide presentation really starts out. Is that if we are thinking about pursuing vocational ministry, if we're in vocational ministry, and y'all have to pardon me, I did target some of this toward people who were just at the precipice of entering into ministry, those who were considering the weight of the calling and should they do this, should they pursue it in this changing context. So when I talk about pursuing vocational ministry, there are things that we should be thinking about on the front side. Because again, that old model of vocational ministry, where pastors are treated as professionals, where you go to school, you get degreed, you get the job, and you take care of yourself and your family. That model is disintegrating, and all of the deference that we enjoy because of that model is going away. Now, that doesn't mean that our calling is irrelevant. It doesn't mean that somehow the work of the church is irrelevant, but it does mean that we're confronted with an opportunity, again, to creatively approach how we go about this work. But before we can talk about how we approach this work or overcome the challenges and embrace the opportunities of vocational ministry, we have to talk about what it's worth to us. When you talk about vocational ministry, what is it worth to you? And this is a deep question because it really gets at our calling, our sense of calling. Well, we raised in a particular tradition where this is what you did, or this was expected, or do we have a deep sense of calling to this work? Was this a career move, moved on that was based somehow on some sentiment that we felt? Was it a career move, or do we have this deep sense of calling, or then the final question I want y'all to think about is the community that I'm called to, are they worth having uh, capable clergy serve them, even if the dollars don't support it? What's it worth to you? Is it a career or a calling? And is the community that you love, some of you, the communities that you came out of, uh, is it worth the investment of trained and capable clergy, even if a package isn't offered, even if there's no salaries to support your seminary education? These are questions that you have to consider, and I call them gut check questions, because it removes the romantic view that, again, some people have when they go to seminary, go to Bible college, or what their expectations, their career track. Sometimes it doesn't work that way, and more times than not, I believe that as we move forward, this model of bivocational ministry is going to become the norm. It's not gonna become. It is not optional. It's going to be a norm. So, as you consider the answers to these questions, understand that callings are irrevocable and irresistible, but careers change. Understand that careers are subject to change. Pastoral ministry is not just office or title, but it is calling, and we are called emphatically to particular people and particular places for designated periods of time. And we got to be faithful to that at the onset. So anybody who's approaching ministry, desiring to serve the church in any kind of way, that's got to come off the top. What's it worth to you? Are you looking for a career? Are you pursuing a calling? And then in your heart, really, do you value this community in such a way? Do you love them in such a way that you would invest time, talent, and treasure, even if there is no immediate material gain for you? Yeah, those are questions that have to be asked. So then, after kind of those centering, or some would say decentering questions or troubling questions, we move into this kind of practical um, examination of how we overcome the challenges, and embrace the opportunities of tent making. Now, again, I've been serving the church here in Birmingham for 20 years. I have been working for all 20 of those years. Again, I do the work of an engineer, so I have really demanding schedule, but God has blessed me on the one to be able to support my work in the other. And while I don't claim to be an expert, I have 20 plus years, almost 30 years of ministry experience that have kind of informed what I hope is going to bless you and challenge you for the rest of the time that we're here. And I would add this. I would add this, that while I say I've been doing this for 20 years, it hasn't been a burdensome 20 years, and I thank God for that. I count that as grace. But it has not happened in a vacuum. One of my first challenges as a new pastor was rebuilding a sanctuary that had burned down. So yeah, this is not like kind of like a Pollyanna, rose petal bowl of cherry story. We had significant challenges in a very poor community that was in transition, and then we had a fire. So the principles that I hope to share with you all aren't principles that have been deployed in a vacuum. This has happened in the amid all the real life challenges and struggles that we all somehow or another are confronted with when we serve the church. So overcoming the challenges of tent making, the weightiness of pastoral ministry is challenging all by itself. You couple that burden with the added demands of tent making, and it can seem overwhelming. Again, I've been living this experiment for over 2 decades, and I failed a whole lot. Let me go ahead and tell y'all that I've failed a whole lot. I've missed the mark a bunch of times, but like any meaningful life lessons, pretty much everything we learn that matters, we learn through failing. So part of what I'm sharing with you is where I failed, with the hope that you can learn from and perhaps even redeem my my mistakes by doing better than I've done. I see you, Mary. You've been doing this for 9 years. Yeah, I see. Again, and with us being kind of dispersed because of COVID, again, this is very relevant because we're having to learn how to do our work in a very different way. We are scattered, which again to me represents an opportunity for us. And I think it kind of comes along nicely with uh, what I'll be discussing with y'all from here on out. Overcoming the challenges of vocational ministry. Number one is simple and it sounds silly, elementary. Plan your work. Anytime you have a lot to do, failure to plan is a plan to fail. I know that is a cliche, but you gotta have a plan. You got to plan your work. I serve in a Baptist tradition, and very quickly after accepting a call, we don't serve in a lectionary tradition. Well, we don't use a lectionary in our tradition. I found out really quickly as a younger pastor that preparing sermons every week is a challenge. It is exhausting. And with all the just the competing priorities of pastoring and visiting and being at the board meetings and doing all of this other stuff, and then having to go to work, trying to pastor and work a job and raise a family and do those things well demands that you have some kind of plan for your work. And you need to have some type of plan that stretches beyond just the next week. You can't just do this one day at a time. If you're going to last, if you're going to endure, serve well in bivocational ministry, you have to plan your work. And particularly, I'm speaking about planning your lessons and planning your sermons. And again, because I serve in a lectionary tradition, that meant that I had to take a lot of time of not just studying, but paying attention to my subtext, listening to what was going on in the lives of the people that God had sent me to serve, and exegeting them in as much as I would exegete a text, so that I could speak and serve them in ways that were meaningful. And y'all, that just requires a plan. And on the front side, sitting down to do this type of planning seems like a time consuming project. If you learn how to plan well, what you end up with is a time multiplier. It will save your life, right? It will save your life. So plan your work. And I know I got limited time. So pardon me if it seems like I'm moving quickly, but yeah, I'm just trying to get through the slide deck, but I don't want to overlook anything that's said. So I'm looking at you all's replies while I'm doing this. Mary says you were put in a position as a newly ordained person, given a closed congregation, but with buildings and acreage, no money, no congregation, salary. Lord have mercy. I love how you say, but lots of freedom to be creative. And I hear you saying your commission was to serve people from the street. We pay the bill by rent. Talk about a creative way of sustaining ministry and a struggling environment. That's precisely, again, I think part of the tool set that we gather from learning how to make tents and do things in ways that may be outside the bounds of what we thought this was supposed to look like, but it's infinitely better than what we could have anticipated. Second, outside of planning your work, y'all, though, is the need for us to empower the laity. In my tradition, where things are typically clergy centered, um, in a very unhealthy way, part of maintaining a healthy congregation and serving well bivocationally is learning how to empower the laity. Realize that you are not the final answer. Don't allow your title to make you self-referential. In all your serving and doing, make sure you're pointing to someone higher than yourself, which means sometimes you have to acknowledge the gifts that God has deposited in others. Sometimes you have to allow for things to not be perfect. You have to take those struggles and those failures as opportunities to learn. And you have to again realize how valuable that is, not just for your good, but for the good of your congregation. You cannot be the end all to end all. Part of empowering laity means that you have to surrender deference that people would apply to you as pastor or as elder or as bishop, whatever title that is. You have to be willing to set that aside for the health of the body, which means that your leadership is going to become necessarily more collaborative, that you will see yourself as a voice among voices. And though as pastor or leader, you are more visible and more vocal, you are no more important. And a great part of your work is equipping others to do the work of the ministry. My pastor taught me years ago as a young preacher that my job pastorally ultimately should be to put myself out of a job. I'm not in the business of raising dependents, but I disciple people who will ultimately take over my job in this work. You have to empower laity. That means you distribute responsibilities and you lead collaboratively. That is a challenge because that is a culture shift. It was a culture shift in my congregation, and I imagine some of you will encounter the same type of resistance to that type of shift, but it's absolutely necessary for sustaining the life and the health of a congregation. You got to empower the laity. And in empowering the laity, necessarily, that means, and I kind of hinted at this on the previous side, that empowering laity means that you're going to have to learn how to let some things fall. Things fall sometimes, and that is necessary. To everything, there is a season. There are programs that run their course. There are issues that are no longer relevant in a particular context. Times change, and as leaders, as ministers, pastors, we got to get used to this. This doesn't have to be cast as a bad thing. Learn to see it and learn how to sell it to your folks as an adventure. It's a change. Even if that means as a leader that you have to admit your limitations, admit your vulnerability, and confess your own anxiety. While you're doing all that, remind folks that we're all in this together. One of the things that I said to my congregation early on, because I realized the challenges of bivocational ministry, is that I told them flat out, this cannot be about my personality. This is about our personality, and I can't be hero or goat. I will not take credit for all of our ministry successes, but I will not own the burden of all of our failures. We simply go as far as we go, and we go together. Again, that means empowering the laity, learning how to let some things fall, learning how to let some things go when it's time to let them go. And then also, again, as I've hinted at, it means learning how to lose our egos. Learning, my friend Todd Bolsinger says that leadership is about learning how to disappoint people at a rate they can absorb. And that kind of cuts against our inclinations to be the know-it-all, Jesus Christ on roller skates, the superheroes that people expect us to be. We think that we have to be that person. And in some ways, we secretly relish that deference. But if we're going to serve faithfully, bivocationally, if we're going to empower the laity, if we're going to foster a type of leadership that empowers others, that's deeply rooted in the type of discipleship that Jesus did, then we got to lose our egos. We got to lose our hang up your cape and put your boots in the closet. There's room for none of that in bivocational ministry. We serve, again, one voice among many voices. We aim at empowering laity to distribute the responsibilities to lend to the health of the entire body. That means lose the ego, lose the deference, lose that complex that you have to be the end all to end all, and learn how to accept failures as lessons. Now, all of this stuff that I've talked about up to this point is about your relationship to the congregation or to the context wherein you were serving. As I shift now and overcoming the challenges, I want to say something about the necessity of realizing your gifts as pastor leader, and then learn to stay in your lane. Despite the Apostle Paul, and I'll probably get in trouble for arguing with the Apostle Paul, but so be it. Paul liked to argue. Despite Paul's declaration that he's become all things to all people, that he might save some, yeah, that's aspirational. And you, pastor, brother, sister, elder, church leader, you are one person. You are one person with a particular set of gifts for that body. As quickly and as early on in your ministry, learn what those gifts are. Learn what those gifts are. Give them to that your context. Give them to that body wholeheartedly, and then stay in your lane. Realize your gifts and stay in your lane. That means that you have to establish healthy boundaries, which is where we are shifting gears to right now. If you don't learn how to establish boundaries, you're going to end up unhealthy. And you're going to suffer for it. Your health will suffer for it. Your mental health will suffer for it. Physically, you'll suffer for it. And if you're married or if you have a family or a partner, then they will suffer for it as well. Part of being able to balance and do bivocational ministry for me starts in my own home. You have to have healthy boundaries. You have to guard the space that you have for you and your family. And one of the things that strikes me about this is that this is one of the things that we do not do well as ministers, pastors, church leaders. But I want to direct you to the story of Abraham and Isaac, of when Abraham went up to Moriah to sacrifice Isaac, and just as he was getting ready to sacrifice his one and only, God interrupted him and he provided an alternative. So I say to you, preach brother, preach sister, pastor, minister, elder, deacon, I say to you that God does not want you to sacrifice your health. He doesn't want you to sacrifice your family or your marriage in the name of serving God's people. God is not called, he has provided for us an alternative. And that alternative is called the laity. That alternative is learning how to empower the folks who are around you and to serve with them and to trust the gifts that God has deposited in others so that you can be present as parent or as spouse and protect even your own family. It'll do you well in the long run to learn this. And I didn't learn it until I was already on my way, but I've learned it, and it is a lifesaver, and your family will appreciate you for that. All right. All right. Then outside of boundaries for you and your family, pastor, brother, sister, take care of yourselves. Take care of yourselves. Take care of yourselves. Make a Sabbath and keep it. Matter of fact, have multiple Sabbaths throughout the day where you pause to make sure that you are all right. Give yourself space and room to be human, eminently human. Give space to yourself to be tired and take some rest. Whatever that may look like, emotionally, mentally, physically tired, take some rest, take some time off. Learn how to play, learn how to date your spouse, play with your children. Take time away. It is not going to all fall apart if you are not present. You don't have to be in every meeting. You don't have to sign off on every issue. Empower the people that serve with you to do those things so that you can take care of yourself. I have a quote here from, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it says, I wonder what would happen if we suspended our inclination to control time, to manipulate the clock or calendar in order to be more productive. Y'all, this is pervasive. This is this grind language that we have in our culture, right? What if we suspended that inclination? And rather than managing the clock and managing the calendar and managing our time so that we could be more productive, we learned how to become stewards over our lives so that we can be healthier and happier and live longer. Y'all hear me on that? Steward your life, not the clock or the time. When you start talking about in terms of stewarding your life, you have to begin to make determinations about what is valuable and what is meaningful and what you should give yourself to and what you can say no to. Because outside of your family, your loved ones, those who God has given to you, spouse, partner, children, those that God has given you to nurture and love on, outside of that group of people, and I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but in the ministry where you serve today, right now, no matter how much they say they love and need you, you are replaceable. If something happens to you, they might drape the pulpit for a month. They'll be sad for a few days, but they will ultimately replace you. You are not as necessary as you think you are. And I don't mean that to diminish your calling. It's a high, it's a tremendous calling, it's a glorious calling, but you are not as necessary as you think you are. If something happens to you, you can no longer serve. Uh, God willing, the church goes on. But the impact of your absence on your family, on your spouse, on your children, and those environments, you are irreplaceable. I have a belief that healthier men and women make healthier pastors. And you cannot mask one uh, without the other. You can't have the one without the other. So take care of yourselves physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Take care of yourselves. Stop trying to run the clock and calendar and steward your life. Steward your life. Steward your life and learn how to say no to some things, which again ties back to the statements I made about letting some things fall and learning how to stay in your lane and empowering your ministry. If you're going to do bivocational ministry, you're going to be sustained over a long period of time. You have to learn this balance. Overcoming the challenges, brothers and sisters, take care of yourselves. And then beyond that, and some of y'all anticipated this from the onset, uh, part of balancing vocational ministry is learning how to see all work as sacred work. If you have to work a job in order to continue to serve the body, that is not a burden, it is a blessing. It is a divine opportunity for your realm of influence to be expanded. It is not something that is restrictive or prohibitive, but it is an opportunity for your influence to be expanded. I told y'all early on that in my 20 years of serving the Zion Spring Church here in Alabama, I've done the work as an engineer. And in the 20 years that I've been working as an engineer and a pastor, I have pastored a whole bunch of engineers who would never go into a church. And it's happened because I labor with them and I live with them. I'm with them when they lose loved ones, when their children grow up and leave home, when somebody gets sick in their families. I'm living and working alongside them in a way that I would not be afforded if I were just a solo pastor serving in my religious context without having to also work. Those would be missed opportunities. I never would have met these people, never would have learned who their families were, never would have been touched by some of the challenges that folks are touched by who have to go to a 9 to 5. I'm not insulated from those things. So going to work has become a sacred act. The people that I work with become my parish. Now, I don't go in there and announce that and say, hey, y'all, I'm going to pastor y'all. No, but by living and laboring and working alongside people, God creates opportunities for me to do ministry in ways that are not just declarative, but also demonstrative, right? As tent makers, our only protection against drudgery and departing into error is to cultivate a sensitivity to God's presence wherever we are. Again, whatever work God has called us to do is sacred work. Whatever work He sets to our hand is an act of worship. And in that work, humility and integrity must be the garments that we wear. We have to determine to be authentically ourselves wherever we are and no matter who is around us. Bi-vocational ministry comes with challenges on your time and on your mental faculties, just the energy that's required. But y'all, it's not an obstacle. It is an opportunity. Your influence is broad and you'll reach people that you'll never reach. And we need to, if this is the model going forward, if this is where our society is tracking, we need to learn how to embrace that. One of the things that I'm constantly reminded of, and I don't know if it is Brother Lawrence or Henry Nouwen, maybe a combination of the two, helped me to distill a thought about practicing God's presence. Wherever we are, there God is. Whatever work He sets before us, that is a sacred work. And when we learn to practice God's presence, when we learn to see God everywhere, this is a spiritual discipline, because if we don't learn how to see God everywhere, in all actuality, we probably don't encounter Him anywhere. Which means that even as we gather our robes and stand behind the sacred desk, if we have not practiced God's presence while we are laboring, there's no guarantee that He will meet us in what we deem as our divine or our holy vocation. So yeah, that's my spiel on surviving and thriving in bi-vocational ministry. Our context is changing, y'all. Our people still deserve trained and qualified clergy. Can't just be about a career move, can't be about a check. It's about a calling. And if it is a calling, then God will empower and equip us to continue to serve faithfully. I know I ran through all of that stuff kind of at lightning speed. If you want to think about, read about some of these things in greater depth, you can pick up my book, Blessed Are the Tent Makers. It's available in Kindle and print editions on Amazon. These ideas are fleshed out a bit more, not this 30,000 foot view that I've just ran through with you all. But Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you and to share with you and encourage you. Those of you who are laboring, continue to labor. God sees your efforts and He's pleased with you. You're doing good work. And I'm happy to be sharing this journey with you. Minister Sam, I see you. I see you. God bless you. God bless you all. And yeah, blessed are the tent makers. Blessed are the tent makers. Thank y'all for joining. You have any questions before we go? I've shared uh, website information where you can pick up a copy of this little short book. It's not going to be overly time consuming. It's a little short book, a primer, if you would, a little field manual for things to do uh, uh, in order to balance bivocational ministry. Um, yeah. Has my poetry been published? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There is a book called Pieces. It is called Pieces. That is a book of poetry. It's also available in print and Kindle. You can go out to Amazon.com, type in out of Mixon, you'll see I've got probably 15 works that have been published, scores of blog posts and articles. I do great work with a organization out of Atlanta, Georgia called the Macedonian Ministry, the Ministry Collaborative. I work as a content curator where I help support, care for pastors who are trying to balance work-life demands and stay faithful. Uh, so yeah. This is kind of my wheelhouse, and I love to see pastors doing well and taking care of themselves. Yeah, yeah. You said the title of my poetry book. I'm gonna see if I can grab a link for you for that. Um, you can of course go and view all of my works on my website, which again is adammixon.com. I know that's not very creative, but that's what was available. So I see you, Deborah. I'm glad to be able to offer the affirmation. I'm going to share a little bit of a secret with you all before I go. A few years back, I think again, what kind of fueled me to write this little book was I was having a conversation with a pastor on a public forum who was coming down pretty hard on clergy who had opted to continue to work while they were serving the church. And his directive was that if you're serving the church, that's all you should be serving. And if you are keeping a job, then somehow you're not trusting in God and not honoring your calling, which it was abuse of scripture. It was wrong. And because this person was pretty well esteemed, I kind of took him on in a public debate, and he got angry at me, but I was able to encourage a bunch of my brothers and sisters who got their feelings hurt. They were deeply hurt because they felt like somehow they were failing in ministry because they were having to continue to work um, secular jobs, and I use that term very loosely. um, that coveted spot of just sitting and serving the church as if that's the only way to serve the body. Yeah. Yeah, I think our culture is shifting. That model won't be supported. All of us got to have a job. And I think that's a healthy shift. I think anything that decenters clergy or clergy centered models for ministry is a healthy shift. So I kick my soapbox. All right. Um, my boss is in the chat now, Miss Womack. Are we good to go?